In the year 1649, the world watched as the sun set on an era of divine rule. The British monarchy, a symbol of centuries-old power and tradition, faced its most profound upheaval. This was the year Charles I, the man who had so fervently believed in the divine right of kings, met his end. The echoes of his execution would reverberate through history, marking a dramatic shift from monarchy to republic. Charles I stood on the scaffold before an unforgiving crowd, his fate sealed not by the whims of fate, but by the tides of rebellion. He had sought to rule with an iron fist, believing his authority was ordained by God. But the people had grown weary of his absolutism and his wars, the burdens of which they had borne. The clash between king and parliament had become a battlefield of ideals. His stubborn refusal to compromise, his disdain for parliamentary power, and his imposition of unpopular taxes had driven the nation to the brink of civil war. The English Civil War had been a crucible of blood and strife. It was not just a conflict of armies, but of ideologies. On one side were the royalists, loyal to the king's notion of absolute power. On the other, the parliamentarians, advocating for a government that represented the will of the people. This struggle was marked by both valor and tragedy. As the war dragged on, the parliamentarians, led by figures like Oliver Cromwell, grew increasingly resolute. The turning point came with the defeat of the royalist forces and the capture of Charles III. Charles III was put on trial for treason, an unprecedented act that shook the very foundations of monarchy. His trial was not merely about justice, but about redefining the nature of governance itself. The charge was clear. He had violated the trust of his subjects, ruling not by their consent, but by his own will. Charles, despite his dire circumstances, maintained a defiant dignity. He famously declared, "I see all the birds are flown," referring to his critics' absence. Yet, even as he stood firm, the wheels of change were irrevocably turning. On a chilly January morning, the axe fell, and with it, the life of a king. The execution of Charles I was more than a mere act of justice. It was the symbolic end of an era. The monarchy, a beacon of unchallenged authority, had been irrevocably altered. With the king's death came the birth of the Commonwealth, a new republic led by Oliver Cromwell. The monarchy had been abolished, replaced by a government that promised greater fairness and representation. The Great Seal of the realm was replaced with a new emblem, and England was declared a republic, a commonwealth governed by the will of the people rather than divine right. But even as the old symbols fell, new challenges arose. The experiment in republicanism was fraught with its own struggles, as power dynamics shifted and the vision of a just society was constantly tested. The fall of Charles I and the rise of the Republic were more than just historical events. They were a profound transformation of a nation's soul. The echoes of that tumultuous time resonate even now. It was a time when ideals clashed, when old certainties were shattered, and when a nation grappled with its identity. In reflecting upon this chapter of history, we are reminded of the enduring quest for justice and the persistent struggle for a government that truly represents its people. The fall of the crown was not the end, but the beginning of a new era, one that continues to shape the world we live in today. As we ponder the past, we must remember that history is not a mere chronicle